Hi, beautiful people. I hope you are ready for some different fairy tales. I'm still reading fairy tales written down by Parker Fillmore, and the fairy tales I'll be reading to you are Czechoslovak. So take out whatever you are working on and have a listen or just watch the video. I'm still working on my Josephine wall. I'm doing the last two squares. I'm over halfway and then I will be turning around the painting. So let's get into this. The shepherd's nosegay. A nosegay that's a little bouquet of flowers that's often given to someone, like for example at a marriage or to someone special. I had to look up the words, so that's why I'm telling you this. The shepherd's nosegay. The story of a princess who learned to say please. There was once a king who had a beautiful daughter. When it was time for her to get a husband, the king set a day and invited all the neighboring princes to come and see her. One of these princes decided that he would like to have a look at the princess before the others. So he dressed himself in a shepherd's costume: a broad brimmed hat, a blue smock, a green vest, tight breeches to the knees, thick woolen stockings, and sandals. Thus disguised, he set out for the kingdom where the princess lived. All he took with him were 4 loaves of bread to eat on the way. He hadn't gone far before he met a beggar who begged him, in God's name, for a piece of bread. The prince at once gave him one of the 4 loaves. A little farther on a second beggar held out his hand and begged for a piece of bread. To him the prince gave the second loaf. To a third beggar he gave the 3rd loaf, and to a fourth beggar the last loaf. The fourth beggar said to him, "Prince in shepherd's guise, your charity will not go unrewarded. Here are 4 gifts for you, one for each of the loaves of bread that you have given away this day. Take this whip, which has the power of killing anyone it strikes, however gentle the blow. Take this beggar's wallet. It has in it some bread and cheese, but not common bread and cheese, for no matter how much of it you eat, there will be always some left. Take this shepherd's axe. If ever you have to leave your sheep alone, plant it in the earth, and the sheep, instead of straying, will graze around it. Last, here's a shepherd's pipe. When you blow upon it, your sheep will dance and play. Farewell, and good luck go with you." The prince thanked the beggar for his gifts and then trudged on to the kingdom where the beautiful princess lived. He presented himself at the palace as a shepherd in quest of work. And he told them his name was Jan. The king liked his appearance, and so the next day he was put in charge of a flock of sheep which he drove up to the mountainside to pasture. He planted his shepherd's axe in the midst of the meadow, and leaving his sheep to graze about it, he went off into the forest, hunting adventures. There he came upon a castle where a giant was busy cooking his dinner in a big saucepan. "Good day to you," Jan said politely. The giant, who was rude, unmannerly fellow, bellowed out, "It won't take me long to finish you, you young whippersnapper." He raised a great iron club to strike Jan, but Jan, quick as thought, flicked the giant with his whip, and the huge fellow toppled over dead. The next day he returned to the castle and found another giant in possession. "Ho ho!" he roared, on sight of Jan. "What, you young whippersnapper, back again? You killed my brother yesterday, and now I'll kill you." He raised his great iron club to strike Jan, but Jan skipped nimbly aside. Then he flicked the giant with his whip, and the huge fellow toppled over dead. When Jan returned to the castle the third day, there were no more giants about. So he wandered from room to room to see what treasures were there. In one room he found a big chest. He struck it smartly, and immediately two burly men jumped out, and bowing low before him, they said, "What does the master of the castle desire?" "Show me everything there is to be seen," Jan ordered. So the two servants of the chest showed him everything, jewels and treasures and gold. Then they led him into the gardens, where the most wonderful flowers in the world were blooming. Jan plucked some of these and made them into a nosegay. That afternoon, as he drove home his sheep, he played on his magic pipe, and the sheep, pairing off two by two, began to dance and frisk about him. All the people in the village ran out to see the strange sight and laughed and clapped their hands for joy. The princess ran to the palace window, and when she saw the sheep dancing two by two, she too laughed and clapped her hands. Then the wind whiffed her a smell of the wonderful nosegay that Jan was carrying, and she said to her serving maid, "Run down to the shepherd and tell him the princess desires his nosegay." The serving maid delivered the message to Jan, but he shook his head and said, "Tell your mistress that whoever wants this nosegay must come herself and say, 'Janichko, give me that nosegay.'" When the princess heard this, she laughed and said, "What an odd shepherd! I see I must go myself." So the princess herself came out to Jan and said, "Janichko, give me that nosegay." But Jan smiled and shook his head. "Whoever wants this nosegay must say, 'Janichko, please give me that nosegay.'" The princess was a merry girl. She laughed and said, "Janichko, please give me that nosegay." Jan gave it to her at once, and she thanked him very sweetly. The next day Jan went again to the castle garden and plucked another nosegay. Then in the afternoon he drove his sheep through the village as before, playing his pipe. The princess was standing at the palace window, waiting to see him, when the wind brought her a whiff of the fresh nosegay that was even more fragrant than the first one. She ran out to Jan and said, "Janichko, please give me that nosegay." But Jan smiled and shook his head. "Whoever wants this nosegay must say, 'My dear Janichko, I beg you most politely please to give me that nosegay.'" "My dear Janichko," the princess repeated demurely. "I beg you most politely please to give me that nosegay." So Jan gave her the second nosegay. The princess put it in her window, and the fragrance filled the village until people from far and near came to see it. After that, every day Jan gathered a nosegay for the princess, and every day the princess stood at the palace window waiting to see the handsome shepherd. And always when she asked for the nosegay, she said, "Please." In this way a month went by, and the day arrived when the neighboring princes were to come to meet the princess. They were to come in fine array, the people said, and the princess had ready a kerchief and a ring for the one who would please her most. Jan planted the axe in the meadow, leaving the sheep to graze about it, went to the castle, where he ordered the servants of the chest to dress him befitted his rank. They put a white suit upon him and gave him a white horse with trappings of silver. So he rode to the palace and took his place with the other princes, but behind them, so that the princess had to crane her neck to see him. One by one, the various princes rode by the princess, but to none of them did the princess give her kerchief and her ring. Jan was the last to salute her, and instantly she handed him her favors. Then, before the king or the other suitors could speak to him, Jan put spurs to his horse and rode off. That evening, as usual, when he was driving home his sheep, the princess ran out to him and said, "Jan, it was you!" But Jan laughed and put her off. "How can a poor shepherd be a prince?" he asked. The princess was not convinced, and she said in another month, when the princes were to come again, she would find out. So for another month Jan tended sheep and plucked nosegays for the merry little princess, and the princess waited for him at the palace window every afternoon, and when she saw him she always spoke to him politely and said please. When the day for the second meeting of the prince came, the servants of the chest arrayed Jan in a suit of red and gave him a sorrel horse with trappings of gold. Jan again rode to the palace and took his place with the other princes, but behind them, so that the princess had to crane her neck to see him. Again the suitors rode by the princess one by one, but at each of them she shook her head impatiently and kept her kerchief and ring until Jan saluted her. Instantly the ceremony was over. Jan put spurs to his horse and rode off. Although the king sent after him to bring him back, Jan was able to escape. That evening, when he was driving home his sheep, the princess ran out to him and said, "Janichko, it was you, I know it was." But again Jan laughed and put her off and asked her how she could think such a thing of a poor shepherd. Again the princess was not convinced, and she said in another month, when the princes were to come for the third and last time, she would make sure. So for another month Jan tended his sheep and plucked nosegays for the merry little princess, and the princess waited for him at the palace window every afternoon, and when she saw him she always said politely, "Please." For the third meeting of the princess, the servants of the chest arrayed Jan in a gorgeous suit of black and gave him a black horse with golden trappings studded in diamonds. He rode to the palace and took his place behind the other suitors. Things went as before, and again the princess saved her kerchief and ring for him. This time, when he tried to ride off, the other suitors surrounded him. Before he escaped, one of them wounded him on the foot. He galloped back to the castle in the forest, dressed once again in his shepherd's clothes, and returned to the meadow where his sheep were grazing. There he sat down and bound up his wound in the kerchief with the princess, which the princess has given him. Oh my God. Then, when he had eaten some bread and cheese from his magic wallet, he stretched himself out in the sun and fell asleep. Meanwhile, the princess, who was sorely vexed that her mysterious suitor had again escaped, slipped out of the palace and ran up the mountain path to see for herself whether the shepherd were really with his sheep. She found Jan asleep, and when she saw her kerchief bound on his foot, she knew that he was the prince. She woke him up and cried, "You are he! You know you are!" Jan looked at her and laughed, and he asked, "How can I be a prince?" "But I know you are," the princess said. "Oh, Janichko, dear Janichko, I beg you please to tell me." So then Jan, because he always did anything the princess asked him, when she said, "Please," told her his true name and his rank. The princess, overjoyed her to hear that her dear shepherd was really a prince, carried him off to her father the king. "This is the man I shall marry," she said, "this and none other." So Jan and the merry little princess were married and lived very happily, and the people of the country, when they speak of the princess, always say, "That's a princess for you." Why, even if she's a princess, she always says please to her own husband. Oh, so sweet. Yeah, so that's the story about why do princes always, yeah, in that day that must have been really common to be or a prince or a shepherd or, yeah. So princes always disguise themselves in shepherds. That's like a thread uh, that's going through all these stories. If you want to look awful, nah, he doesn't look awful. I mean, but yeah. Just give me some time to refresh, and the next story, the next one, that's a great story. I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit tired, and I'm doing this while my oldest boy Casper is looking after the little ones, because I said I want to have some time to do these stories. And the bird is doing really great. It's eating a lot. I think that poor animal must have been famished, starving really, because it's eating and eating and eating. And my uh, my smallest ones, they want to call him Pichu instead of Pikachu, because apparently Pichu is the stage before Pikachu. And they told me, yeah, now he's really small, so we will call him Pichu, and when he is grown, we will call him Pikachu. But I don't think he will. I don't know. It seems like a young canary, but it could easily be just a grown canary. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. So Pichu, Pikachu, whatever. They wanted to call him Rashu when it gets even bigger, but I think that Rashu will be an orange canary. But he's doing pretty well. He's jumping around in his cage, he's eating, he's swinging on the swing that I hang there, and I think later on this evening, now it's 6 o'clock, so within an hour I will put the towel over his cage to get some sleep. So, next is also Czechoslovak, also by Parker Fillmore. Yeah, I'm doing those ones first, but I'm looking into finding some of the gypsy stories, because that would really interest me to find some cool gypsy stories. This one, this is a really great one. I read it once just to see if it was suitable, because some of those stories, man, they're really grim and whew. So this one is a really pleasant one. So this story is called Kuratko the Terrible, the story of an ungrateful chick. Meaning chick as in chicken. Yeah, it's not a woman, it's a chick. Chicken. So, Kuratko. There was once an old couple who had no children. "If only we had a chick or a child of our own," grandmother used to say. "Think how could pet it and take care of it." But grandfather always answered, "Not at all. We are very well off as we are." At last, the old black hen in the barnyard hatched out a chick. Grandmother was delighted. "See, Grandpa," she said, "now we have a chick of our own." But Grandfather shook his head doubtfully. "I don't like the looks of that chick. There's something strange about it." But Grandmother wouldn't listen. To her chick seemed to her the chick seemed everything it should be. She called it Kuratko and petted it and pampered it as though it were an only child. Kuratko grew apace and soon he developed an awful appetite. "Cook-a-doodle-doo!" he shouted all hours of the day. "I'm hungry, give me something to eat." "You mustn't feed that chick so much," Grandfather grumbled. "He's eating us out of house and home." But Grandmother wouldn't listen. She fed Kuratko and fed him until, sure enough, there came a day when there was nothing left for herself and the old man. That was a nice "how do you do." Grandmother sat working at her spinning wheel, trying to forget that she was hungry, and Grandfather sat on a stool nearby too cross to speak to her. Too cross to speak to her, poor guy. And then, quite as though nothing were the matter, Kuratko strutted into the room, flapped his wings, and crowed, "Cook-a-doodle! I'm hungry, give me something to eat." "Not another blessed thing will I ever feed you, you greedy chick," Grandfather shouted. "Cock-a-doodle-doo," Kuratka answered. "Then I'll just eat you." With that, he made one peck at Grandfather and swallowed him down, stool and all. "Oh, Kuratko!" Grandmother cried. "Where's Grandpa?" "Cook-a-doodle-doo," Kuratko remarked. "I'm still hungry. I think I'll eat you." And with that, he made one peck at Grandmother and swallowed her down, spinning wheel and all. Then the terrible chick went strutting down the road, crowing merrily. He met a washerwoman at work over her washtub. "Good gracious, Kuratko!" the woman cried. "What a great big crop you've got!" "Cook-a-doodle-doo," Kuratko said. "I should think my crop was big, for haven't I just eaten Grandmother, spinning wheel and all, and Grandfather, stool and all? But I'm still hungry, so now I'm going to eat you." Before the poor woman knew what was happening, Kuratko made one peck at her and swallowed her down, washtub and all. Then he strutted on down the road, crowing merrily. Presently he came to a company of soldiers. "Good gracious, Kuratko!" the soldiers cried. "What a great big crop you've got!" "Kuratko! Cook-a-doodle-doo!" Kuratko replied. "I should think my crop was big, for haven't I just eaten a washerwoman, top and all, Grandmother, spinning wheel and all, and Grandfather, stool and all? But I'm still hungry, so now I'm going to eat you." Before the soldiers knew what was happening, Kuratko pecked at them and swallowed them down, bayonets and all, one after another, like so many grains of wheat. Then that terrible chick went on strutting down the road, crowing merrily. Soon he met Kotzer, the cat. Kotzer the cat blinked his eyes and worked his whiskers in surprise. "Good gracious, Kuratko, what a great big crop you've got!" "Cook-a-doodle-doo," Kuratko said. "I should think my crop was big, for haven't I just eaten a company of soldiers, bayonets and all, a washerwoman, tub and all, Grandmother, spinning wheel and all, and Grandfather, stool and all? But I'm still hungry, so now I'm going to eat you." Before Kotzer the cat knew what was happening, Kuratko made one peck at him and swallowed him down. But Kotzor, the cat, was not a person to submit tamely to such an indignity. The moment he found himself inside Kuratko, he, he unsheathed his claws and began to scratch and tear. He worked until he had torn a great hole in Kuratko's crop. At that, Kuratko, the terrible chick, when he tried again to crawl, toppled over dead. Then Kotzor the cat jumped out of Kuratko's crop. After him the company of soldiers marched out, and after them the washerwoman with her tub, grandmother with her spinning wheel, and grandfather with his tool. And they all went about their business. Kotzor the cat followed grandmother and grandfather home and begged them to give him Kuratka for his dinner. You may have him for all of me, grandfather said, but ask grandmother. He was her little pet, not mine. Indeed, you may have him, grandmother said. I see now grandfather was right. Kuratko was certainly an ungrateful chick, and I never want to hear his name again. So Kotzor the cat had a wonderful dinner, and to this day, when he remembers, he licks his chops and combs his whiskers. I would rather have this story ending by grandmother and grandfather adopting the cat. But yeah, anyway, so let's see. Oh, we've got some stories of other. Oh, Chinese stories are so great. Oh, wait, I've got something. I will read another story, and this one is called, because, yeah, tigers. It's a Chinese story, The Nodding Tiger. Great. So this is my first read, so if I read something wrong, please have some patience with me. The Nodding Tiger. Just outside the walls of a Chinese city, there lived a young woodcutter named Tang and his old mother, a woman of 70. They were very poor and had a tiny one-room shanty, built of mud and grass, which they rented from a neighbor. Every day young Tang rose bright and early and went up on the mountain near their house. There he spent the day cutting firewood to sell in the city nearby. In the evening he would return home, take the wood to market, sell it, and bring it back for food for his mother and himself. Now, though these two people were poor, they were very happy, for the young man loved his mother dearly, and the old woman thought there was no one like her son in all of the world. Their friends, however, felt sorry for them and said, "What a pity we have no grasshoppers here, so that the Tangs could have some food from heaven." One day young Tang got up before daylight and started for the hills, carrying his axe on his shoulder. He bade his mother goodbye, telling her that he would be back early with a heavier load of wood than usual, for the morrow would be a holiday and they must eat good food. All day long Widow Tang waited patiently, saying to herself over and over as she went about her simple work, the good boy, how he loves his old mother." In the afternoon she began watching for his return, but in vain. The sun was sinking lower and lower in the west, but still he did not come. At last the old woman was frightened. "My poor son," she muttered. "Something has happened to him." Straining her feeble eyes, she looked along the mountain path. Nothing was to be seen there but a flock of sheep following the shepherd. Who is me? Moaned the woman. My boy, my boy. She took her crutch from its corner and limped off to a neighbor's house to tell him of her trouble and beg him to go and look for the missing boy. Now, this neighbor was kind hearted and willing to help old Mother Tang, for he felt very sorry for her. There are many wild beasts in the mountains, he said, shaking his head as he walked away with her, thinking to prepare the frightened woman for the worst. And I fear that your son has been carried off by one of them. Widow Tang gave a scream of horror and sank upon the ground. Her friend walked slowly up the mountain path, looking carefully for signs of a struggle. At last, when he had gone halfway up the slope, he came to a little pile of torn clothing, spattered with blood. The woodman's axe was laying by the side of the path, also his carrying pole and some rope. There could be no mistake. After making a brave fight, the poor youth has been carried off by a tiger. Gathering up the torn garments, the man went sadly down the hill. He dreaded seeing the poor mother and telling her that her only boy was indeed gone forever. At the foot of the mountain, he found her still laying on the ground. When she looked up and saw what he was carrying, with a cry of despair, she fainted away. She did not need to be told what had happened. Friends bore her into the little house and gave her food, but they could not comfort her. Alas, she cried, of what use is this to live? He was my only boy. Who will take care of me in my old age? Why have the gods treated me in this cruel way? She wept, tore her hair, and beat her chest, until people said she had gone mad. The longer she mourned, the more violent she became. The next day, however, much to the surprise of her neighbors, she set out for the city, making her way along slowly by means of her crutch. It was a pitiful sight to see her, so old, so feeble, and so lonely. Everyone was sorry for her and pointed her out, saying, "See, the poor old soul has no one to help her." In the city, she asked her way to the public hall. When she found a place, she knelt at the front gate, calling out loudly and telling of her ill fortune. Just at this moment, the Mandarin, our city judge, walked into the courtroom to try any cases which might be brought before him. He heard the old woman weeping and wailing outside, and bade one of the servants let her enter and tell him of her wrongs. Now, this was just what the widow Tang had come for. Calming herself, she hobbled into the great hall of trial. "What is the matter, old woman? Why do you raise such an uproar in front of my yemen? Speak up quickly and tell me of your trouble." "I am old and feeble," she began, "lame and almost blind. I have no money and no way of earning money. I have not one relative now in all the empire. I depended on my only son for a living. Every day he climbed the mountain, for he was a woodcutter, and every evening he came back home, bringing enough money for our food. But yesterday he went and did not return. A mountain tiger carried him off and ate him, and now, alas, there seems to be no help for it. I must die of hunger. My bleeding heart cries out for justice. I have come into this hall today to beg your worship to see that the slayer of my son is punished. Surely the law says that none may shed blood without giving his own blood in payment." "But woman, are you mad?" cried the Mandarin, laughing loudly. "Did you not say it was a tiger that killed your son? How can a tiger be brought to justice? Of a truth, You must have lost your senses. The judge's questions were of no avail. The widow tongue kept up her clamour. She would not be turned away until she had gained her purpose. The hall echoed with the noise of her howling. The mandarin could not stand it longer. Old woman, he cried, stop your shrieking. I will do what you ask. Only go home and wait until I summon you to court. The slayer of your son shall be caught and punished. The judge was, of course, only trying to get rid of the demented mother, thinking that if she were only once out of his sight, he could give orders not to let her into the hall again. The old woman, however, was too sharp for him. She saw through his plan and became more stubborn than ever. No, I cannot go, she answered, until I have seen you sign the order for that the tiger is caught and brought into this judgment hall. Now, as the judge was not really a bad man, he decided to humor the old woman in her strange plea. Turning to the assistants in the courtroom, he asked which of them would be willing to go in search of the tiger. One of these men, named Lineng, had been leaning against the wall, half asleep. He had been drinking heavily, and so had not heard what had been going on into the room. One of his friends gave him a poke in the ribs just as the judge asked for volunteers. Thinking the judge had called him by his name, he stepped forward, knelt on the floor, saying, I, Lineng, can go and do the will of your worship. Very well, you will do, answered the judge. Here is your order. Go forth and do your duty. So, saying, he handed the warrant to Lineng. Now, old woman, are you satisfied? He continued. Quite satisfied, your worship, she replied. Then go home and wait there until I send for you. Mumbling a few words of thanks, the unhappy mother left the building. When Lineng went outside the courtroom, his friends crowded round him. Drunken sot, they laughed. Do you know what you have done? Lineng shook his head. Just a little business for the mandarin, isn't it? Quite easy. Call it easy if you like. What? Man, arrest a tiger, a man-eating tiger, and bring him to the city? Better go and say goodbye to your father and mother. They will never see you again. Lineng slept off his drunkenness and then saw that his friends were right. He had been very foolish, but surely the judge had meant the whole thing only as a joke. No such order had ever been written before. It was plain that the judge had hit on this plan simply to get rid of the wailing old woman. Lineng took the warrant back to the judgment hall and told the mandarin that the tiger could not be found. But the judge was in no mood for joking. Can't be found? And why not? You agreed to arrest this tiger. Why is that today you try to get out of your promise? I can by no means permit this, for I have given my word to satisfy the old woman in her cry for justice. Lineng knelt and knocked his head on the floor. I was drunk, he cried, when I gave my promise. I knew not what you were asking. I can catch a man, but not a tiger. I know nothing of such matters. Still, if you wish it, I can go into the hills and hire hunters to help me. Very well. It makes no difference how you catch him as long as you bring him into court. If you fail in your duty, there is nothing left but to beat you until you succeed. I give you 5 days. During the next few days, Lineng left no stone unturned in trying to find the guilty tiger. The best hunters in the country were employed. Night and day they searched the hills, hiding in mountain caves, watching and waiting, but finding nothing. It was all very trying for Lineng, since he now feared the heavy hands of the judge more than the claws of the tiger. On the fifth day, he had to report his failure. He received a thorough beating, 50 blows on the back. But that was not the worst of it. During the next 6 weeks, try as he would, he could find no traces of the missing animal. At the end of each 5 days, he got another beating for his pains. The poor fellow was in despair. Another month of such treatment would lay him on his deathbed. This he knew very well, and yet he had little hope. His friends shook their heads when they saw him. "He is drawing near the wood," they said to each other, meaning that he would soon be in his coffin. "Why don't you flee the country?" they asked him. "Follow the tiger's example. You see, he has escaped completely. The judge would make no effort to catch you if you should go across the border into the next province." Lineng shook his head on hearing this advice. He had no desire to leave his family forever, and he felt sure of being caught and put to death if he should try to run away. One day, after all the hunters had given up the search in disgust and gone back to their homes in the valley, Lineng entered a mountain temple to pray. The tears rained down his cheeks, and he knelt before the great fire-looking idol. "Alas, I am a dead man," he moaned between his prayers. "Dead man, for now there is no hope. With that I never touched a drop of wine." Just then he heard a slight rustling nearby. Looking up, he saw a huge tiger standing at the temple gate. But Lineng was no longer afraid of tigers. He knew that there was only one way to save himself. "Ha!" he said, looking the great cat straight in the eyes. "You have come to eat me, have you? Well, I fear you would find my flesh a trifle, though, since I've been beaten with 400 blows during these 6 weeks. You are the same feller that carried off the woodman last month, aren't you? This woodman was an only son, the sole support of an old mother. Now, this poor woman has reported you to the mandarin, who in turn has had a warrant drawn up for your arrest. I have been sent out to find you and lead you to your trial. For some reason or other, you have acted a coward and remained in hiding. This has been the cause of my beating. Now, I don't want to suffer any longer as a result of your murder. You must come with me to the city and answer the charge of killing the woodman." All the time Lineng was speaking, the tiger listened closely. When the man was silent, the animal made no effort to escape, but, on the contrary, seemed willing and ready to be captured. He bent his head forward and let Lineng slip a strong chain over it. Then he followed the man quietly down the mountain, through the crowded streets of the city into the courtroom. All along the way there was a great excitement. "The man-slaying tiger has been caught," shouted the people. "He is being led into trial." The crowd followed Lineng into the hall of justice. When the judge walked in, everyone became as quiet as the grave. All were filled with wonder at the strange sight of a tiger being called before a judge. The great animal did not seem to be afraid of those who were watching so curiously. He sat down in front of the mandarin, for all the world like a huge cat. The judge rapped on the table as a signal that all was ready for the trial. "Tiger," said he, turning toward the prisoner, "did you eat the woodman whom you are charged with killing?" The tiger gravely nodded his head. Yes, he killed my boy, screamed the aged mother. Kill him! Give him the death that he deserves. A life for a life is the law of the land, continued the judge, paying no attention to the forlorn mother, but looking to the accused directly in the eye. Did you know it? You have robbed a helpless old woman of her only son. There are no relatives to support her. She is crying for vengeance. You must be punished for your crime. The law must be enforced. However, I am not a cruel judge. If you can promise to take the place of this widow's son and support a woman in her old age, I am quite willing to spare you from a disgraceful death. What say you? Will you accept my offer? The tiger gravely nodded his head. The gaping people craned their necks to see what would happen, and once more they were surprised to see the savage beast nod his head in silent agreement. Very well then. You are free to return to your mountain home. Only, of course, you must remember your promise. The chains were taken from the tiger's neck, and the great animal walked silently out of the yamen, down the street, and through the gate opening towards his beloved mountain cave. Once more the old woman was very angry. As she hobbled from the room, she cast sour glances at the judges, muttering over and over again, "Who ever heard of a tiger taking the place of a son? A pretty game this is to catch the brute and then set him free." There was nothing for her to do, however, but to return home, for the judge had given strict orders that on no account was she to appear before him. Almost broken-hearted, she entered her desolate hovel at the foot of the mountain. Her neighbors shook their heads as they saw her. "She cannot live alone," they said. "She has the look of death on her wrinkled face. Poor soul! She has nothing to live for, nothing to keep her from starving." But they were mistaken. Next morning, when the old woman went outside to get a breath of fresh air, she found a newly killed deer in front of her door. Her tiger's son had begun to keep his promise, for she could see the marks of his claws on the dead animal's body. She took the carcass into the house and dressed it for the market. On the city streets next day, she had no trouble in selling the flesh and skin for a handsome sum of money. All had heard of the tiger's first gift, and no one was anxious to drive a close bargain. Laden with food, the happy woman went home rejoicing, with money enough to keep her for many a day. A week later, the tiger came to her door with a roll of cloth and some money in his mouth. He dropped these new gifts at her feet and ran away without even waiting for her thank you. The widow Tang now saw that the judge had acted wisely. She stopped grieving for her dead son and began to love in his stead the handsome animal that had come to take his place so willingly. The tiger grew much attached to his foster mother and often purred contentedly outside her door, waiting for her to come and stroke his soft fur. He had no longer he no longer had the old desire to kill. The sight of blood was not nearly so tempting as it had been in his younger days. Year after year he brought weekly offerings to his mistress until she was as well provided for as any other widow in the country. At least, in the course of nature, the good old soul died. Kind friends laid her away in her last resting place at the foot of the great mountain. There was money enough left out of what she had saved to put up a handsome tombstone, on which this story was written just as you have read it here. The faithful tiger mourned long for his dear mistress. He lay on her grave, wailing like a child that has lost its mother. Long he listened for the voice he had loved so well. Long he searched the mountain slopes, returning each night to the empty cottage, but all in vain. She whom he loved was gone forever. One night he vanished from the mountain, and from that day to this no. Oh, wait, again. One night he vanished from the mountain, and from that day to this no one in this province has ever seen him again. Some who know the story say that he died of grief in a secret cave which he has long used as a hiding place. Others add, with a wise shrug of the shoulders, that, like Shanwang, he was taken to the western heaven, there to be rewarded for deeds of virtue and to live as fairy for ever afterwards. Oh, poor tiger. Yeah, so those were the stories. Hope you enjoyed. Just going to drink something and I will be leaving you with this because my time is up. Oh my god, that was a long whip and chat. So, hope you enjoyed. Um, Next, I will be back with a requested video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing and giving me a thumbs up and hitting the bell to be notified anytime I put up another video. With this said, I'm gonna rest my voice a little bit and I'm gonna go to my oldest son. He's now watching the little ones, so I'm gonna relieve him of his duties. And I want to thank you so much, people, for having my back, for supporting me. And I hope you have a really wonderful day and a lovely week ahead. Okay, a lovely weekend. Yeah, it's weekend. Okay, tomorrow's Sunday. So I hope you have a lovely week coming. Thank you so much for listening, guys. You're awesome. Thank you. Bye.